I'm Jim Carney.
I'm Linda Hirsch.
And this is EdCast, a program created and produced by educators for everyone interested in education.
After 10 years of mayoral control of New York City schools, there are plenty of critics and growing opposition to many of the mayor's educational policies. With mayoral control of the city schools up for renewal in 2015, there are those who say we can't afford to wait till then, and that the policy of giving a mayor sole power over education should be repealed now. Joining me today to discuss why mayoral control should be ended sooner rather than later is New York State Senator Bill Perkins, an outspoken advocate for public schools and public education.
Another outstanding critic of Mayor Bloomberg's administration of public schools is veteran New York Assemblyman Herman Denny Farrell. For 38 years, he's represented the 71st District, covering Harlem, Washington Heights, and Inwood. I'll get his take on mayoral control later in the program. But first, let's join Linda and her guest in the studio.
My guest today is New York State Senator Bill Perkins, elected in 2006 to represent New York State's District 30, which encompasses Harlem, Washington Heights, and the Upper West Side. Senator Perkins is a supporter of public schools and public education, but finds himself growing increasingly critical of mayoral control of our schools. Welcome, Senator Perkins, and thank you for joining us on EdCast.
Thank you for allowing me to be here and share with you what's going on.
You have become an outspoken critic of mayoral control of the city schools, and you're joining a chorus of voices that is asking for it to either be limited or repealed. Why?
Because actually, as it was perceived to be by me and others in the beginning, it has become, in fact, dictatorial. Mayoral control provides the mayor with unchecked authority, power to do as he wishes with regard to our public schools, even in the face of outcry from parents, educators, other supporters of public education. Effectively, it has become a dictatorial control process, and it has not proven itself to be better for education or more efficient in terms of how public education dollars are spent.
Well, let's talk about the record of mayoral control. You've voiced many concerns about charter schools. Now, I know there are parents and the mayor who may feel that charter schools provide more choice, but what are some of the issues that you have surrounding charter schools?
Well, let's step back a minute and look at how charter schools became a part of the New York City education landscape. I was there in '89 as a member of the City Council when the first charter school came to New York City. It came to my district, actually, and it came, and to some extent, with welcome, because in fact, my district had been identified as having one of the worst public schools in the city. It came with three concepts. They would be able to teach our children better for less. It would not be in our public schools. In fact, they would be required to open up in facilities or spaces outside of our public schools. And furthermore, that they would be successful in terms of better educating our children, and that success would teach us how to replicate it throughout the system to the other 2.1 million kids, and thereby give us even better efficiency. So in a sense, it was an experiment not intended to be expanded or evolved to the extent that it has become now, which is a very controversial point of contention between parents and the communities. So that's how we began.
So that was the vision.
That was the vision. The first school opened up in my district. It was called the Walter Sisulu Charter School. Again, in the context of great despair and failure, it was welcomed. No sooner did it enter into the system outside of a public school building than things started to change rapidly. They started to move into our public schools in terms of co-locating. They started to demand more resources for those schools. In other words, undermining doing more for less. In fact, the first things that the organizers of the schools did was organize the parents to come to our offices and demand that their children receive as much as the regular public school children, which obviously we're sympathetic to, but in fact, that was not the principle upon which they were founded. And then they also were expecting to be able to be more successful. And the measure of success, from my perspective, did not measure up. In other words, they would look around and say, all your public schools are failing miserably, but look at our school. While it's not quite the star of achievement that we expected, it's better than doing than the schools in the neighborhood are doing. But in fact, the standard of better was a very low standard. They were not actually achieving in a remarkable way. And so, for instance, if all the schools in the neighborhood were, let's say, at a 40% success rate, maybe they were 45. So they were not measuring from the top, they were measuring from the bottom. And for us, that was not good enough. So we demanded that they be able to do more. And no sooner than that started to happen, they started locating in our public schools, causing a great deal of conflict. And this was all done under the guise of mayoral control. Right. And in that respect, it became a battleground of parents, educators, for school property versus what was intended to be a non-controversial approach where they would get their own property to have their particular school.
Now, you have touched on a number of themes that are part of this issue in terms of the charter schools. Their rates of proficiency, their co-locations, the pitting parents against parents. So let's try to deconstruct them a little bit. Let's take the success of charters. Now, I know, and you know, there have been studies that have shown they are not really any more successful in terms of the way students perform academically. Have you seen, I know there's some New York City charter schools that scored a little bit higher, but I know there's been a lot of controversy about charter schools in the fact that they have fewer English language learners, they have fewer special needs students. Is this what you've been seeing?
We've not only been seeing it, we've been actually complaining about the creaming that was being done that would not welcome those students who had special needs or would in fact, remove students who did not quite measure up. But even in the context of that exclusiveness, they still were not measuring up in any really competitive way. And I think that what has been really a sheep in wolf's clothing has become more and more apparent to parents that not only are they not providing an open opportunity for all kids, but they're really not measuring up in terms of what any parent would want. As you know, every mother has within her or gives birth to a genius. There's been no child born of a mother that was not a genius. Ask any mother and she'll tell you. And so all mothers
Nobody's average anymore, right?
All mothers want the same thing for their children, and they'll go to every length they can for that purpose. And that's a wonderful thing. I'm the beneficiary myself of that perspective on motherhood. But the mothers who first came to me with regard to these concerns were mothers who were parents of charter school children, some of whom had special needs, some of whom were regular students, but they all felt that the charter schools that their children were attending were denying them access as parents and parent associations to having dialogue with the leadership of the schools, which is a fundamental understanding about public schools in New York City, that the parent associations are supposed to be involved. And by the same token, they felt that their students were not getting the type of attention that they expected in those schools.
I know some parents also say that charter schools ask underperforming students to leave, and I know that the Harlem Children's Zone has been accused of that, frankly. When you look at the data of who's entered and who's graduated, there's a gap. Students have disappeared. And some of those students have been asked, I think, as underperforming students to leave, which is something the neighborhood public school can't do.
Sure. If you review some of the work that's been done by columnist Juan Gonzalez in the Daily News, he has delved deeply into some of these issues and has found a similar experience, not just with Harlem Children's Zone, but especially with the Success Academy schools that are the premier charter providers today, unfortunately, and has been in the forefront of all the charter battles within the different public schools in our community.
And they've been in the forefront of criticism for co-location. And I just want to paraphrase for our viewers what we mean by co-location. We mean when a charter school enters an existing building that is already housing a public school and is not getting its own separate facility, as you said, the original intent and idea was for the charter, but they're actually entering an existing public school and taking over space. What are some of the issues that arise when these co-locations occur? Because this is a really big issue surrounding charters.
This is a very big issue, as you say, separate and unequal. The schools come in with resources, they're given a floor or two, taken away from the traditional public school that was already there, and they are able to invest in those one or two floors with state-of-the-art equipment, teaching equipment, better facilities for their children in terms of bathrooms and other kinds of needs that they might have. And they're basically isolated from the other parts of the school. They are not allowed to intermingle with those young people and those that are part of that school community, and they, by the same token, the children from the other school, the more traditional public school, are not allowed to be on the floor or in this vicinity of the charter school. No parent in their right mind is going to accept such a division, such a discriminatory approach to education in the school where their child goes to. And so there's been charter wars in which there has been a growing encroachment of these type of schools that start out on one floor, then they wind up taking another floor, and gradually the traditional public school is being squeezed to such an extent that the parents are rising up and pushing back. And this again underscores the problem the problem of mayoral control, because here the mayor's choice is what dictates what ultimately happens. And so the cries of despair and unfairness that are coming from these parents fall on deaf ears, because mayoral control is designed in such a way that he does not have to take that into consideration.
Now, another red flag for people who are looking to repeal mayor control is the mayor's closing of what he calls, or what the system says, are failing schools. And by some data, some of these seem to be failing schools. It is, of course, another reason why he's pushing the charter school, because this existing public school is failing. I know that the closing of schools has really been an impetus for people such as yourself and other policymakers to really feel that the mayoral control situation has gotten out of hand. So why is that? What's wrong with closing a failing school?
Well, there are a variety of ways of looking at this. The suspicion is that the school is not failing in such a way that it cannot be improved. It is the suspicion of the community, which is very often borne out in fact, that the purpose of the closing is to replace that traditional public school with a charter school. And it is felt by the leadership of the school, both the principal and administrative leadership, as well as the teachers and parents of the school, that they're not given a chance, they're not given the resources and the opportunity to turn their school around. Instead, they are automatically denied, and the door is open for a charter school. And so the answer to every suspicious failure is a charter school. So it's clear that the thrust of mayoral control...
Your problem is you need a charter school.
Right, that's the problem. And so the thrust of mayoral control has been to force charter schools into public schools. And then by the same token, they're all in so-called minority communities. They're all in the so-called Harlem and East Harlem communities of the city. And when occasionally they've been suggested to go in communities outside of Harlem, some of which have been in my district, there's such a hue and cry from those communities that they back up and then they reconsider. And then very rarely does it happen that they are nevertheless imposed in those schools. But these are impositions in public schools that do not resolve the conflict that parents have, but nevertheless force themselves, and I don't think that's a good educational environment, whether for the charter school child or whether for the traditional public school child.
Jim Carney had the opportunity to speak with Assemblyman Denny Farrell, who is also seeking to limit mayoral control of our schools. Let's hear what he has to say.
New York State Assemblyman Herman Denny Farrell has represented the 71st District of Upper Manhattan since 1974. We spoke about mayoral control of city schools in his Harlem district office.
Well, first thing, I was one of the people that didn't want to vote for mayoral control, but having gone through the things we were going through in the last 10 years, before that, back in the 1990s, it was pretty hard not to vote because we didn't have anything else to do. If somebody had given me a better option, I might have voted on that, but the only option was mayoral control, and we gave it to the mayor. The problem is, I think, is that the mayor, who was a very good businessman, made a lot of money, and he was a guy who could get things done, thought it was like making widgets, educating children. And he didn't realize the major problem that we had. And after about 3 years into the system, he realized he couldn't handle it. And when charter schools suddenly popped up, he didn't know what to do, so the best thing he could do was to say, well, don't go to our bad schools, go to charter schools. And that has been the problem. And I understand charter schools because I have a child and you're going to educate my child. She is going to get an education, and every parent wants their child to get a better education. So they're not going to get into an argument, charter school, no charter. They're going to go away, things are the best. The problem has been, what happens to the kids who don't get into the charter schools? Are we doing what we should be doing to educate them? And right now, I don't think the city is doing that. They are not reaching the point where we're actually getting the children educated. So we're moving more and more kids into charter. At the rate we're going, we may give the system completely away. And it allows the mayor to say, see, I've done my job. He didn't do his job because he's not in control anymore.
Do you feel that mayoral control of the schools should be revoked, or should it be modified, or what should be done now to take?
Well, I think there's got to be some sort of control. We've got to look to see we actually got to redo the whole thing. We cannot continue to have the charter schools taking more and more of the kids out and then creating two levels of education, and that the worst level is the city education. What we have to do is make sure that those schools which are still standing should be made better. They should be doing a better job. The fight should be for people fighting to bring their children back to the public schools, not the charter schools. And however we do that, through mayoral control, through locals. One of the things we did when we did mayoral control, we didn't realize that we silenced the lambs. There was nobody out there speaking for the children. It used to be the chancellor. The chancellor was the one who was appointed and elected, and that chancellor was the one that said what the people wanted to hear. That's why we lost so many of them, because if they couldn't meet the standard, they left, type of thing. But we got rid of that. We have a silent person now. The chancellor we put in there, and I have nothing against the gentleman that's there now, but when he put in the original person that he put in, his only response was to the mayor, not to the people. And it took a while for the parents to finally begin to get a voice again. And that voice, as I said, I'm sorry to say, is driving people toward the charter schools.
So what do you think is the route that should be taken? Would it be in Albany? Would it be in the city?
It's not that simple. The mayor learned that, and I know better than to say it's that city. That's simple. But one of the things we should be doing right now is making sure the class size goes down. The mayor keeps saying class size has nothing to do with it. You look at your private schools and look how small their classes are, their class sizes. Because we have a problem. We have children from all over the world in this city. And nothing against them. That's what makes us a great city. But you've got to educate them. And you can't do it with a large classroom size when you've got 35 kids and speaking different languages. We've got to make sure that everybody can get an education. You've got to make those classes smaller.
And now back to Linda and Senator Perkins in the studio.
So Assemblyman Farrell obviously sees a need as well to limit or repeal mayoral control. You were talking about also the fact that citing a school as failing seems to be an excuse to put in another charter school. It seems as if charter schools are moving out of the districts that we're familiar with, and that they're seeking now to go into Brooklyn, to go into
Brooklyn
West
Heights,
Side.
the
I
West
think they
Side.
really are. And you're saying in those instances that parents really fight back.
Yeah,
And
parents
I
fight back in all instances, from what I've noticed. But clearly, there is I must say, there is a somewhat of a preferential treatment given to the Success Charter School Company because
Eva Moskowitz Success Academy.
Yes, and they are the ones that seem to be given a carte blanche opportunity to go wherever they want with the political support that the mayor brings to that by virtue of this mayoral
They
control.
certainly have expanded, there's no question.
The word expanded is a modest way
Okay.
of putting it. It's more like exploded
Okay.
all over the city, and it's a shame because wherever they go, there's controversy. And it would seem to me that an educational environment full of so much controversy spells problem for our children. Now, I believe that this is not simply about charter schools as we know them. I think this ultimately is about the privatization of the public school system, particularly from a for-profit perspective, where we've begun to see this phenomenon, not in New York City per se yet, but in other parts of the country. And in fact, if you go to Albany, there are more charter school students than there are public school students. And so the public school system in Albany is basically a charter school public school system. It no longer has the majority of their students in the traditional public school classes.
Well, there are
and
many-
in fact, they're not even doing well as such. But there's real estate involved in which these schools have been able to establish themselves with vast parcels of real estate as an investment that I think is a sign of what's to come in terms of the privatization and the for-profit approach that we're going to see in terms of charter schools.
Do you think that under mayoral control we've made any progress in closing the academic achievement gap between minority students and white and Asian students? That was something the mayor said he was going
There's
to.
clearly no clear evidence of that, number one. And number two, if anything, it has exacerbated the relationship between the mayor and public school parents, as well as the mayor and public school teachers. So generally speaking, such hostility, such comprehensive, pervasive hostility between the leader and those who work in the system forebodes not success but failure. And I'm sorry to say that this mayor, I believe, has really been a very, very bad mayor from the perspective of public education.
Has there been anything positive about his decade of mayoral control? Anything you can point to that you say?
Well, in terms of public education, it's hard to say there's anything, especially because in the arena that I work, in the district that I work in, the public school system has been in battle. I remember when public schools had a great deal of diversity in terms of the curriculums, and those were the schools like the Central Park East schools that my children attended.
Of the Deborah Meyer School.
Of the Debbie Meyer.
Yeah,
Those are schools, I think, that proved themselves to be successful. So new approaches to public education are not unique to New York and have not always met the kind of hostility that we see. There's a history of creativity and innovativeness, particularly in District 5 at the time, that was remarkable and actually nationally renowned to such an extent that the head of the school system in that district, the superintendent of the school system in that district, was chosen for higher and higher positions in terms of local as well as national educational advice. To how did you do so well over here? And in fact, interestingly, in the Central Park East schools, though located in Central Park, on the East Harlem, folks from
they were very
the West
popular,
Side
very
would
popular
even come
schools.
over to those schools. And so you had an interesting integration without any kind of friction or any type of antagonism.
We're almost out of time, so I want to ask you quickly, how realistic is it? I know that Assemblyman Keith Wright has presented a proposal to repeal mayoral control now before it is up for renewal in 2015. You are in favor of repealing mayoral control before 2015. What will be accomplished prior to 2015? Will we limit mayoral control, or are we waiting?
First and most important, we'll be rid of this mayor. Okay.
Okay.
That's promising, depending upon who becomes the next mayor. It would seem to me that for parents and other advocates of public education, whoever becomes our mayor has to make a commitment to reform mayoral control so that it doesn't have this sort of dictatorial, lack of transparency and accountability approach that we've seen over the last 12 years with this particular mayor. So I'm optimistic that we can find such a candidate. Obviously, this is not the place for me to name that candidate, but I would hope that
We'll invite you back, and I hope then you
I would
will.
look forward to it. But my concern in the major movement that I'm involved with organizing is the concern of parents who are looking for a mayor that understands the shortcomings of mayoral control and has a true commitment to public education, and not that we are afraid of reform, but clearly understand that the role that charters have played has been an antagonistic, provocative role that has not helped public education in New York City.
So if not now, at least now we're putting these questions out there, and people should really be thinking and questioning what we want in 2015.
Without a doubt, amongst the priorities for any candidate, that whether for city council, borough president, public advocate, controller, and most importantly, mayor, must be the concern of our public schools and returning the sanity and transparency and accountability to the public school system so that parents do not feel shut out. The worst thing you can do to a mother with respect to her child is give her the sense that you're trying to shut her out of the opportunity for that child to have the type of education that that little genius deserves.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Senator Bill Perkins. It was a pleasure having you on our program. Please don't go away. We'll be right back with our Ed Bites. Thank you so much. Welcome back to this edition of Ed Bites.
College degree and no job? This scenario seems too commonplace for this year's graduates. A paper released this month by the Economic Policy Institute titled "The Class of 2012, Labor Market Remains Grim for Young," finds that today's graduates confront both high unemployment and underemployment, lower salaries, and high student loan debt. Young people face a jobless rate that is twice as high as the general population. Reasons for the grim statistics include young workers' lack of experience and lack of seniority, and their greater movement between jobs, careers, and locations. Yet despite this bad news, the authors still stress the value of a college degree and point to better employment numbers for those with degrees than without.
It's common knowledge U.S. students are not the highest performers in international rankings. So what's the problem? The view among policymakers and the public is that U.S. students don't receive as much time in school as students in better performing countries. Is this perception accurate? A study by the Center for Public Education, which examined instructional time internationally, reveals otherwise. Though state mandates vary, U.S. students receive about 900 to 1,000 instructional hours per year. Yet there are higher performing countries such as Finland, Korea, and Japan which provide fewer hours, ranging from 777 for Finland to 867 for Korea. The study concludes the U.S. does not require less instructional time than other countries, and that it's not the amount of time children spend in school, but rather the quality of that time.
Well, that does it for this edition of EdCast. Thanks for joining us.
Until next time, class dismissed.